There's a house right now sitting on a truck bed that costs less than most people's used car. And by the end of this year, thousands of Americans are going to be living in one full time. It is not a shed. It is not a camper. It is called a micropod. And in 2026, it might be the single smartest way to own property without a mortgage. But here is the catch nobody in the pod home industry wants you to know. And I'm going to reveal exactly what it is before this video ends, because it could save you tens of thousands of dollars. Before we get into it, hit that subscribe button right now, because this channel breaks down real numbers on tiny and alternative housing every single week. No sponsors, no affiliate links, just honest research so you do not get burned. Now, let's get into the micropod. Stick around till the end, because I'm going to show you the one pricing trick that pod manufacturers use to make a $30,000 home look like it costs $15,000. And if you do not know it, you will overpay before you even sign a contract. A micropod, sometimes marketed as a capsule home, an apple cabin, or a space pod house, is a factory-built micro-dwelling, usually somewhere between 100 and 300 square feet. Unlike a traditional tiny house on wheels, which is basically a small house built onto a trailer chassis, a micropod is designed and manufactured as a single sealed unit, shipped whole or in large sections, and then craned or trucked directly onto a piece of land. Some install in a single day. There is no framing crew standing in your yard for 6 weeks. The pod shows up finished, plumbing and electrical already run, and in many cases it is bolted down and ready to sleep that same night. The pod home movement exploded out of the glamping and Airbnb world, where guests wanted something that photographed like it belonged in a science fiction film. But by 2026, it has become something much bigger. Remote workers, retirees, and first-time buyers who are priced out of market, where the median home in the United States sits above $400,000, are now looking at micropods as an actual primary residence, not just a weekend novelty. Let us talk numbers, because this is where most videos on this topic lie to you. You will see thumbnails promising a $15,000 home. And that number is technically real, but it is almost never the number you will actually pay. Here is the honest breakdown for 2026. A basic micropod shell, meaning the structure, insulation, and a roof with no plumbing, no kitchen, and no bathroom, starts around $10,000 to $15,000. One well-known entry-level model, the Mantra Micro Cabin, comes in at roughly $17,000 for a stripped-down 98-square-foot space that sleeps two, with a metal roof, a wall-mounted television, and a mini-split air conditioner, but no full kitchen or bathroom included. Move up to a mid-tier pod with a real kitchenette, a bathroom, insulation rated for 4-season use, and basic smart features, and you are looking at $25,000 to $50,000. At the top of the market, fully fitted luxury pods with marble-style surfaces, panoramic glass, full smart home integration, and premium finishes run anywhere from $65,000 to $95,000. And here is the number almost nobody puts in the headline. Delivery, site preparation, foundation, or pier work, and utility hookups typically add another $5,000 to $15,000 on top of the base price, depending on your location and how far the pod has to travel. So when you see a headline screaming $15,000 home, always ask, is that the delivered, livable price, or just the empty shell sitting at the factory? That distinction alone can be a $30,000 difference. The broader prefab tiny house market, which includes traditional tiny homes on wheels, modular accessory dwelling units, and pod-style homes, is growing at roughly 7% to 9% a year. But pod and capsule-style homes specifically are the fastest growing slice of that market. And the reason is not just affordability, it is social media. These things are built to be visually distinctive. A rounded, futuristic pod sitting in a forest or on a cliff edge gets shared, gets booked, and gets clicked on in a way a rectangular cabin never will. That visual appeal is directly driving Airbnb and glamping demand, which in turn is funding a wave of manufacturers racing to build faster and cheaper. But 2026 has also brought a real shift in what buyers expect. Industry researchers are calling it a move from basic space saving to what they describe as purposeful luxury, meaning compact homes that no longer feel like a compromise. 5 trends define this shift this year. First, ground floor living, where designers are dropping the loft bedroom entirely so the home is accessible without a ladder, which matters enormously for aging buyers and anyone with mobility concerns. Second, invisible smart home integration, using unified smart hubs that quietly manage lighting, climate, and energy without a wall of switches. Third, warm minimalism, replacing the sterile all-white pod interiors of a few years ago with earthy tones, with texture, and biophilic design that actually feels like a home instead of a lab. Fourth, expandable and sliding designs that let a pod grow from a single room into a larger footprint without needing a full second unit. And fifth, steel frame construction is becoming far more common in wildfire and hurricane-prone regions because buyers are done watching wood frame builds fail in extreme weather. This is the part that will make or break your entire plan, and it is the part most pod sellers gloss over completely. Zoning is the single biggest obstacle standing between you and legally living in a micropod full-time, and the rules are a genuine patchwork depending on where you live. If your pod sits on a permanent foundation, most jurisdictions will require it to meet the International Residential Code, and specifically a section called Appendix Q, which sets safety and livability standards for homes under 400 square feet. Things like minimum ceiling heights, egress windows, and safe electrical work. A growing number of states have adopted Appendix Q, which is good news, but plenty of local zoning boards still enforce minimum dwelling size requirements ranging anywhere from 600 to a full 1,000 square feet, which on paper makes a micropod illegal as a standalone residence, no matter what the building code says. The workaround that most owners actually use is the accessory dwelling unit pathway, commonly called an ADU. This means placing the pod on a property that already has a primary home, essentially a legal backyard unit rather than a standalone house. States like California, Oregon, and Washington have passed strong statewide ADU laws that override restrictive local ordinances, and in 2026 several other states have made real progress, though the details matter more than the headlines. Georgia has adopted statewide codes, making it legally easier than ever to build under 400 square feet, but it is important to understand that this does not override local zoning bans outright. Counties and municipalities in Georgia still hold the final say on lot size rules, and where a small home can actually be placed, so the state made building code compliance easier, not local approval automatic. Texas just rolled out Senate Bill 785, a landmark law that forces cities to allow manufactured and modular housing by right in at least one residential zone, rather than singling it out for extra permitting. That law technically protects HUD code manufactured homes rather than uncertified micropods directly, but is opening major doors for the broader alternative housing and modular pod community across the state. Washington allows up to 2 ADUs on a single property without requiring the owner to live on site. And several counties their cap ADU size around 800 to under 1,300 square feet, which comfortably fits almost any micropod. If instead your pod sits on wheels rather than a foundation, the legal picture changes entirely. Wheeled units are typically treated as recreational vehicles rather than homes, which means they usually cannot be a legal full-time residence outside of an RV park, a tiny home community, or land specifically zoned to allow it. So before you buy anything, the single most important call you can make is not to the pod manufacturer. It is to your local planning and zoning department, asking specifically about accessory dwelling unit rules and minimum dwelling size requirements in your exact parcel. A micropod makes the most financial and lifestyle sense in a handful of very specific situations. If you already own land with an existing house and you want a legal, income-generating rental unit or a place for aging parents or adult children, the ADU pathway makes a pod one of the fastest, cheapest ways to add real housing to your property. If you run or want to run a glamping or short-term rental business, a pod's visual uniqueness genuinely does command a premium nightly rate compared to a standard cabin. And if you're a remote worker or retiree who wants to drastically cut housing costs and does not need more than 100 to 200 square feet of private space, a pod can work extremely well as a primary residence, provided your zoning allows it. Where a pod stops making sense is if you're trying to raise a family in one, if you have significant storage needs, or if you're buying purely because the $15,000 marketing price convinced you it would be nearly free. Once you add delivery, site prep, utility hookups, insurance, and any land cost, a modest full-time livable pod realistically lands somewhere between $30,000 and $60,000 all in, which is still a fraction of a traditional home, but it is not the fantasy number in most thumbnails. Because these homes are ships as much as they are houses, construction quality varies wildly between manufacturers, and the material choice tells you almost everything about how long a pod will last. Budget pods are typically built with a lightweight steel or aluminum frame skin, similar to a shipping container wall, wrapped around rigid foam insulation. This keeps weight down for shipping, but cheaper units skimp on vapor barriers, which in a humid climate leads to condensation building up inside the walls, something owners often do not discover until mold shows up 2 winters later. Better-built pods use a cold-formed steel or engineered timber frame with continuous exterior insulation and a proper vapor and air barrier system. The same principles used in high-performance traditional construction, just applied at a smaller scale. Some of the more advanced 2026 models are being engineered to seismic and hurricane-grade standards, with manufacturers explicitly certifying units to withstand extreme wind loads and be used in wildfire-prone regions, something that was rare in this category even 2 years ago. If you're buying anywhere with harsh winters, hurricane exposure, or wildfire risk, ask the manufacturer directly for their insulation or value. Their vapor barrier specification and any third-party certification. Do not just trust a glossy render on their website. Most entry-level pods ship with standard shore power hookups, meaning you plug in the same type of electrical connection a home or large RV would use, and you'll need a nearby water line or a holding tank system for sewage unless you install a composting toilet, which a large number of full-time pod dwellers choose specifically to avoid septic permitting headaches. Mid and upper-tier pods increasingly ship solar-ready or fully solar-powered out of the box, with rooftop panels and battery storage size to run lighting, a mini-split heat pump, and small appliances independent of the grid. Fully off-grid capable pods exist, and several manufacturers now market units built to be completely self-sufficient for power and water, which matters most if you're placing a pod on remote land without utility access, since running grid power or a well to a rural parcel can easily cost more than the pod itself. Because a wheeled pod is legally personal property rather than real estate, it typically cannot be financed with a conventional home mortgage. Most buyers instead use a personal loan, a specialized RV loan product, or home equity financing if they already own the land it will sit on. A pod placed permanently on a foundation and classified as an ADU is a different story, since it becomes real property attached to your land, which means it can sometimes be rolled into a home equity line of credit or a renovation loan, and dedicated ADU financing products have become more common in states that have aggressively legalized backyard units. Either way, budget for insurance as its own separate cost. A foundation-built ADU pod can usually be added to a standard homeowner's policy, while a wheeled unit generally needs RV-specific coverage, and owners consistently underestimate ongoing costs like this, along with tire replacement and relocation permits if the unit ever moves, which can add another $1,000 to $3,000 a year that never shows up in the sales brochure. If you're cross-shopping, here is the honest comparison. A traditional tiny house on wheels gives you more customization, a more traditional home-like layout with a loft, and a build process you can often watch or participate in. A micropod gives you faster installation, a more distinctive and rentable design, and in many cases a lower entry price for a basic unit, but less room to customize once it leaves the factory. If resale value matters to you, foundation-built units in ADU-friendly jurisdictions currently hold value better than either wheel category, simply because they qualify as real property that a future buyer can finance conventionally. Let us walk through what an actual purchase looks like, because numbers on a page hit differently once you attach them to a real decision. Picture a couple who already own a quarter-acre lot with a small existing house in a state with strong ADU laws. They choose a mid-tier pod, roughly 200 square feet, with a real bathroom, a kitchenette, and a mini-split heat pump priced at $32,000 from the manufacturer. Delivery runs 800 miles, adding $6,000. Site work, meaning a simple pier foundation, electrical tie-in, and a water and sewer connection to the existing house, adds another $7,000. Permitting fees in an ADU application in their county run about $1,500. Total delivered and legal cost, $46,500. That pod then becomes a long-term rental generating around $1,800 a month in a mid-size market, which means it pays for itself in a little over 2 years, and every dollar after that is close to pure income minus utilities and maintenance. That is the real math behind why so many landowners are adding a pod instead of a second traditional structure, which would easily run 2 to 3 times that price for the same square footage. A few quick answers to the questions that show up in the comments on every pod home video. Can you get a 30-year mortgage on a micro pod? Almost never on its own, since lenders typically require a minimum square footage well above what most pods offer, though a foundation-built ADU attached to an existing mortgage property can sometimes be rolled into a home equity product instead. Do pods hold their value? Foundation-built units in ADU-friendly areas hold value reasonably well because they are real property, while wheeled units depreciate more like a vehicle than a house. How long do they actually last? A well-built steel or engineered timber pod with proper insulation and vapor barriers can realistically last 25 to 40 years with normal maintenance, while a poorly built budget shell may show serious moisture or structural issues within 5 to 10 years, which is exactly why the construction section earlier in this video matters more than the sticker price. Can you put a pod on land with no utilities at all? Yes, with a solar power system, a water tank or well, and a composting toilet. Though you should always confirm your county allows off-grid living before you commit, since some jurisdictions still require connection to municipal water or sewer for occupancy. And now, the pricing trick I promised you at the start. Almost every micro pod manufacturer advertises its lowest possible configuration. The smallest size, no bathroom, no kitchen, base insulation, sometimes not even including the trailer or foundation hardware, and calls that number the price of the home. Then every single upgrade you actually need to live in it, plumbing, a real bathroom, a kitchen, insulation upgraded for your climate, delivery, and site prep, gets added afterward as a separate line item. It is the exact same tactic car dealerships use with a stripped-down base model on the lot. The fix is simple. Before you ever compare 2 pod companies, ask both of them for one number, the fully delivered, fully livable, code-compliant price for your specific location. That is the only number that actually matters. If this saved you from getting fooled by a fake $15,000 number, that is exactly why this channel exists. Honest research, real data, no sponsors ever. Subscribe if you have not already, and let me know in the comments which pod home you're considering. I read every single one, and I am building out a full comparison series based on your questions. I will see you in the next video.